Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name's Dabney and I'm an evolutionary astrologer. And I am so excited to have back the one, the only Ronnie Pontiac, who has still to this day has the #1 video on all of my videos. So I know that he's a fan favorite, and I've actually had people like write in, when is Ronnie coming back? So if you want your daily dose of Ronnie, and you don't want to wait for him to come back on my channel, he does have his own YouTube channel. And I've actually been watching it because he has been posting some archived content. So Ronnie is a very spiritual person. You can't really pigeonhole him as an astrologer, even though he does astrology. He's more into the esoteric arts in general. So if you're looking for only his astrological takes, you might be disappointed. But if you are looking for much more like esoteric, how to live in this world from a much more spiritual, intellectual place. Would you agree with that description? How would you describe your channel?
Well, I'm flattered by your description, and I'll leave it with you.
Okay. All right. Well, he's done this whole new series that I've been listening to, kind of based on the Kabbalah. And anyway, you have to just kind of check it out for yourself. But it was recorded many, many years ago, where he heads up an astrological esoteric center that was founded by Manly P. Hall. Anyway, fascinating person that I'm excited to have here with us. And you're going to very much want to stick around because Ronnie's going to be telling us what he thinks is going to happen given all of this crazy uncertainty, all of the challenges that we're all kind of feeling right now and experiencing. I know the #1 question that I get asked, and it sounds like he's getting asked too, is what's going to happen? So, if that's content you're interested in, Mr. Ronnie Pontiac, take it
Thank
away.
you.
What's going to happen, Ronnie?
Well, the first thing I want to do is draw our attention to something that already has happened. You may have noticed that for the beginning of this new administration, we saw very little opposition. The great leaders of the opposition were not out there giving speeches. There were very few rallies or protests, and very little action was taken. And people were wondering what happened? How come there isn't any kind of resistance to all this change? Neptune, having been in the last degree of Pisces, a rather apocalyptic kind of a degree that is the end of the whole zodiac and the end of a 165-year journey for Neptune, seems to have paralyzed the response. Neptune entered Aries, and one day later, Cory Booker gave that 25-hour speech. All of a sudden, we had huge protests. We had big rallies for the Stop Oligarchy tour. And until recently, the leaders of the opposition party, Obama, Harris, Biden, we had really not heard anything from them. And everybody was wondering why. Well, they also finally came out and gave speeches. And we can debate whether this is going to do any good or not, but I'm not asking you to consider that. I'm asking you to look at this sea change that one day after Neptune left Pisces in the old cycle and entered its new cycle, and be forewarned, it will return to Pisces at the end of this year for a few months, but it's going to wind up staying in Aries for a long time beginning in 2026. Right after this happens, we have this sudden upsurge. So we can certainly say that it would appear that the Democratic Party is responding to Neptune entering Aries, to this new cycle that is beginning, and it has emboldened them. But the thing about Neptune and Aries is that it also emboldens the reckless. It emboldens the deluded. And with Mars opposition Pluto exact on April 26th and building every day this month, we have this culmination of a process of extreme aggression that began around November 3rd last year, just before the election, and has been playing out ever since. And with Mars in Cancer, not a happy place for Mars. There are conflicts around issues having to do with homes, families, country, borders, boundaries. What's the definition of patriotism? Who belongs in my family and who doesn't? If you don't love us, you shouldn't be here type of thinking. Mars in Cancer also gives the male side of the society equation a conservative cultural compass that is essentially nostalgic for the 20th century. Men had a lot more privilege, opportunity, and fun in that century. And I was there. It's true, as compared to the first quarter of this one. But then on the other hand, the first quarter of the 20th century was rough too, with World War I, right?
Yeah.
So you've probably heard about the shock doctrine, which is what I think we're experiencing right now. It's just rapid, sudden change, shocking changes, and the idea being to kind of stun everybody into a submissive state of mind. And the United States has used the shock doctrine against other countries. So, in a way, I think it's poetic justice that during the US Pluto return, it may turn this monstrous policy upon itself. It seems to be. Because the whole point of the US Pluto return is to confront its shadow, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to go back to Neptune and Pisces because this is what we're leaving. And I want everybody to get a good feeling of, okay, this is where we've been. And we'll look at history a little bit too, like other things that happened at other times when Neptune was in Pisces. But the first thing to know is that with Neptune and Pisces, it is all about Christianity, at least in the West. And in general, it's about being on your best behavior, the traditions of the ancestors. And you better do it or else. But Neptune in Aries, which is where we are now, is about not being on your best behavior. So not being on your best behavior. It's about youth and setting out to leave behind this long cycle of the past and laughing at, the primitive emotions and policies of your elders, oh God, they're so out of it. And realizing the world will belong to the young because time is marching on. At some point, every generation awakens to the understanding that the future is theirs. That hasn't happened yet here. So I think you can expect a vibrant counterculture sooner than later that is going to be sharp and funny and enlightening and ruthlessly self-centered. And these are kids born with Pluto and Sagittarius. I think they're going to make it clear how much freedom matters to them. And I know people look at it, they think it's impossible, that kind of thing is not going to happen with the way the kids are today. But you got to remember that the crazy hippies were clean-cut young men and women just a few years earlier. They didn't show any sign that they were going to be, running around the streets naked and yelling about free love and protesting and refusing to go to war and just breaking all the traditions. The parents never see it coming. And I have a feeling that the Pluto and Sagittarius generation, which at this point I think is kind of doing the Sagittarian look, just leave us alone, okay? We don't ask for much. We just want to have fun, be around people we like. We want to travel. We don't even identify very much with countries and things like that. But when enough happens to press in on their sense of freedom, I think they will display a quite a dramatic kind of passion for equality and for liberty. And I think that they will be somewhat like the Pluto and Leo kids, who were the kids of the Summer of Love and that generation. Although they'll do it in their own ways, and it will look different, and the ways that they do it will be different. So, what happens next, as you brought up? Many astrologers are predicting wars because wars happened in the past during some of these planetary sign placements. Neptune in Aries, for example, did coincide with the American Civil War. And the Peloponnesian War in ancient times between Athens and Sparta, one of the most famous of all wars, happened then. But around the same time, Socrates was leaving his indelible impression on philosophy and religion, and Aristophanes was inventing comedy by making fun of him. So there was this culture going on. The same way that during the American Civil War, great writing was happening. People like Walt Whitman we're changing how America relates to the wilderness, for example. During the Roman Empire, when Neptune was in Aries and Pluto was in Aquarius, like they are right now, Queen Boudica led a great uprising against Rome. She was defeated, but left inspiration for underdogs fighting for their freedom that has lasted to this day. Neptune in Aries has seen peasant revolts, Lincoln's legendary Gettysburg Address, the abolition of slavery, the funding of the Red Cross, the invention of pasteurization, color photography, P.T. Barnum's Circus, and Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. So to me, there's a sense there of breaking out of the pessimism of the past, of looking beyond apocalyptic scenarios, and even a celebration of life. And I think with Neptune and Aries, we're going to see even more trolling and flaming on social media. I think it will get worse. But we may also see the birth of new social media platforms that redefine what social media is by being transparent and fair to those of us who provide the information and attention that are sold for profit. I think that Neptune and Aries is going to be propaganda wars like we've never seen before. AI extravaganzas. You will not be able to tell what's real news and what isn't, even to a degree that today will seem impossible. As we've seen from China's recent troll video about obesity in America, that kind of stuff. And then bot wars, epic battles of trolls trying to influence elections and raise the blood pressure of their enemies. Um, our elections have become wars. So I'm hoping that this time around, we're not going to be fighting a hot war the old-fashioned way. I think it could be all done remotely. And I think the battlefields are likely not to be our cities, but our economies, our governments, our media, our cultures. And it's a war of hacking and of manipulating public opinion and of kind of getting the same results that one would hope to achieve by war, but doing it in these surreptitious ways that masquerade as policy or as social movements or as consensus when there really isn't any consensus. Neptune rules social media, which is the perfect tool for this kind of thing. And with Neptune in Pisces, especially in the wake of the pandemic, social media became more influential than ever, a kind of bubble or even a womb of nostalgia that everybody kind of exists in. And seemingly, it's a direct form of communication, but it's deceptive and filled with illusions and manipulations and delusion. And there, all these social media platforms are infested with trolls, bot colonized, and based on the clickbait economy. They want outrage, despair, and hubris so they can get more clicks, more ad imprints, more traffic. Um, there's a thing about social media that I always like to share. I think it's helpful. The scientist and Christian psychic Emanuel Swedenborg, who lived hundreds of years ago, has some really interesting ideas about hell that have resonance with our current social media experience. Now, you might think that the core emotion of hell would be fear or hate or anger or jealousy. But according to him, it's two emotions associated with giving and receiving support. It's gloating when we withhold support spitefully while feeling the satisfaction of a deluded sense of superiority. That's one of them. The other is feeling aggrieved because we don't get the support we feel we deserve. Those are the emotions of hell. The damned at one moment feel a cruel satisfaction denying the needs of others and watching them suffer. The next moment, they despair that they receive no support, and everybody knows it. If Swedenborg was right, then social media is like the gates to hell. Like there really is a gate to hell on planet Earth, and it's social media.
Called
So
Facebook.
yeah, exactly. Well, all of them really.
Yeah. No.
Even, and so think about that when you're on them, that if you don't try not to fall into that seductive kind of I'm not going to support that because damn them, and God, I feel so terrible as no one supported what I don't be motivated by those things, and you liberate yourself from a lot of wear and tear on your adrenal glands for one thing. Um, so what about the immediate future? We have the final degree of any sign and the first degree of any sign as being especially significant for obvious reasons. The last degree of Pisces, last sign of the zodiac, is very potent. And the same holds true for the first degree of Aries. And the last degree of Pisces is hosting the end of a long Neptune cycle and of a long Saturn cycle. They're going to be going through there together. And the Neptune cycle, like I said, is about 160, 165 years ago. The Saturn cycle began in 1999. That's a long time ago. As of last night, April 15th, Mercury has left Pisces for Aries. It kind of gives us a peek. So look around you around this date of April 15th. Look at the few days coming up to it and look at a few days after it and look for signs in the beginning there of this kind of pessimism of Pisces, this these endings, this sense of doom. And then in the few days after, look for signs of renewal, of the new cycle, of what may be the actual future. Let's take a brief look at the history of Saturn and Pisces because these two are going to dance together. We have a Saturn Neptune conjunction coming up, and we'll talk about that. A lot of people have been told scary things about it. It has scary potential, such as a pandemic, but it also has some highly positive potential. Um, right now, Saturn is on its way to this final degree of Pisces, which will happen in May. And then it will happen again at the beginning of next year. So these are the kind of things that have happened when Saturn was in Pisces, and see if you can see the kinds of metaphor for what's happening now. It won't be the same kind of events, but there's a similar flavor to these things. In the late 17th century, it was a time of witch trials and unilateral moves based on the politics of religion. So, for example, one morning the Protestants in France woke up and found out that their religion was banned in the whole country by the king. So, convert or else. We're all Catholics now. Another example of Saturn and Pisces in the early 16th century was when Rome was invaded and pillaged by Spanish and German troops, and the Pope was made a prisoner. There again, this massive political conflict, but based around religion. Other periods of Saturn and Pisces saw the Crusades or Genghis Khan uniting the Mongols. And then when Neptune entered Aries, he began his conquest of an enormous empire. A devastating plague in the Roman Empire, Viking invasions. You see these metaphors of kind of uh, bullying and crisis and disaster and outbreaks of violence and turned over social systems and such. So Saturn, as I said, enters Aries on May 30th. We do get about 5 months, as I mentioned, of Saturn back in Pisces at the end of this year. But what we're going to see during this Neptune and Aries, especially once Saturn has joined it there, and when Uranus has left Taurus for Gemini, I think it will be clear that a change of era is happening. Now, you might think that's what's going on right now, right? That all these changes that are being forced on us, and there's going to be the government's going to be different, and the whole way the U.S. Legal system is operating is being challenged. Now that this is the revolution, this is the new order. I don't think so, astrologically speaking, because the new era has not been, has not arrived yet. And I believe that what we're seeing is the last gasp of the old era. We won't see the new one, or even glimpses of it clearly, I think, until at the earliest in summer when Uranus enters Gemini. We should get some good glimpses of how it will play out. But it's very important to keep in mind that one thing about Uranus, you can't expect the unexpected. So I don't believe that we can just look and say, oh yeah, that's the agenda that's happening right now. That's this revolutionary change. I don't think so. I think that what's coming up after it is the revolutionary change. What it is causing is going to be the revolutionary change, but not in the way that it intended it to be. Um, One thing about Uranus and Gemini, because it brings with it the US Uranus return. America, just in time for the 4th of July, right?
Yeah.
America has fought a war for freedom and independence every time Uranus has entered Gemini. And since Pluto in Aquarius in the past included the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, uprisings of citizens, would-be tyrants could not have stumbled upon worse astrological aspects for their efforts. No matter how much they wish that they could wish into the cornfield in El Salvador, the way things have been done over time and the people who disagree with them and such, they are looking at a world where, astrologically speaking, the weather is the people demand their power because it is the power of the people. The people lend their power to leadership, but the power belongs to the people. And that is what is demonstrated when Pluto is in Aquarius.
So recently I kind of did my like, what do I think is going to happen?
Hmm.
And similarly, there's always the high road and the low road. So there's always opportunities for everyone to, kind of take a very dark turn. But I think we have taken a very dark turn. And to me, I do have an agreement with you in the sense that he who shall not be named feels very much of the old. It feels very much of what we have just been through. And that started in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
That was that kind of crumbling that, was incremental and began, but had this acceleration towards, lo and behold, 2016 till today, the last decade when Pluto was in Capricorn. So it's interesting. I do believe that Saturn going into Aries potentially has this kind of karmic cleanup. There is this sense of like, we've got to fix this chaos because it has been so chaotic and we've all been, and there is less paralyzation and people start to wake up and the fog clears. And then we have this sense of there is something new. But I also am not rose colored glasses to see also that, okay, so we have just blown up our image on the world stage.
Mhm.
We will no longer be the world's leader in the way that we have been. Does that mean that we will suddenly become, you know, Nicaragua? No, I don't necessarily think that, but do I think that people are moving on? And I think that other nations have been emboldened, and maybe that's part of what has to happen because of the broken system when people can't get health care, so all of these things have to sort of be destroyed in order for the new to be built. The cautionary tale, though, is the dark side of Pluto and Aquarius, which is all of this dark side of technology as well. And we see these plutocratic techno bros who have designs on our future, which to me feels much more of the new threat than the craziness that we are currently living under. So, what do you think about that?
Nonsense.
I
They're
love
old,
it.
they're old school. They're so
You,
old school. They're like the guys that used to hire, gunmen to shoot at the workers at night so they wouldn't strike,
so,
in
okay, so you
American
don't believe the
factories.
techno bros and the Pluto and Aquarius is going to be like the real thing that we're dealing with.
Oh
Like,
no, I think that actually the funny thing is, I think that I will say that I was surprised how quickly the negative side of Pluto and Aquarius manifested.
Yes. And
Stunning.
people did call it too. Like
Yes,
it's
very
like
much.
overnight people went from revering, that terrible swastika car person to like now, right, like reviling. I mean, it was a pretty, and then we had like obviously the Luigi thing, which was also a harbinger of like the people saying we're not going to play this game anymore. So it's sort of an interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I
I'm
think
loving hearing you say that because that's probably been one of my biggest.
well, it's old white dudes trying to control everything,
Well, it's
and
young white dudes too, or middle-aged white dudes.
well,
That's
I mean
more Gen
leadership,
X dudes than I would be
the leadership,
happy about.
but the
Yeah.
leadership of it, the big billionaires, the Ellises, the Musks, and such,
Yeah.
Bezos, these are old dudes,
Yeah.
and they're all white dudes. This is
Yeah.
it couldn't be more old school. And even the way I would say, this is just personal, but the way that some of them remind me so much of this wonderful uncle I had. He was wonderful because he never ran for politics, never ran for an office or anything. He would have been a disaster. He was a flamboyant, incredible character, really loved America, loved John Wayne, all that stuff. And but he always like had around him these very attractive women who were beautifully dressed, and they were sort of like the 40s ideal or the 50s ideal of the woman at the side of the great man. And when I look at the women that are being put into cabinet positions, I know some of them are in their own ways very accomplished, but they all look like that to me. They're all sort of these plastic surgeried, you know, personalities that represent beautiful women, and they have to be beautiful. For God's sake, you can't have a homely woman in the cabinet position, even if she's brilliant. That is
The manga
so
maker.
so
Yeah.
old school. And the idea that you can just kind of screw over the people because you're rich and do whatever you want and you shouldn't have to pay any taxes, that is the old American robber baron mentality.
Oh,
Aquarius is about diversity and equality and appreciates what that brings to the table. As an Aquarian, I mean, I love all cultures. I want to hear from everybody, even people I disagree with, because I understand the power of that. When you are stuck on just your own vision, let's get to that. But I want to I want to talk for a minute about something else, which you mentioned kind of, and this is another reason why I think that this is old school, because this urge toward tyranny, and you kind of mentioned this, grew into power with Pluto and Capricorn from 2008, right? Up until what was a year ago or something.
November 30th.
Right. And so Pluto and Capricorn set the foundation for these current events that are playing out now. Everything was written during Pluto and Capricorn. This whole scheme of 2025 and the Heritage Foundation and all that was hatched during Pluto and Capricorn. And
Citizens
it's
United.
mhm.
Yeah.
And with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, pointing to the militant side of Christianity, the evangelical and Catholic missions to control governments, to create a godly state. This is old school stuff. And historically, it never works out well. I mean, just never. You think people would learn. And then, and so here, let's look again at this, what we're coming out of. Okay. So Saturn in Pisces. So I can show you both sides of this because that's the amazing thing about this. Saturn in Pisces is similar to Saturn conjunct Neptune. So some of what I'm saying here will apply to what's coming up over this next year, year and a half with Saturn conjunct Neptune. Um, on the one hand, it's when the Communist Manifesto was printed. On the other, it's the pre-Raphaelite painters. On the one hand, it was the Confederacy forming and seceding from the Union. And on the other, it was when Thoreau wrote Walden and Melville wrote Moby Dick and Whitman wrote Leaves of Grass and redefined American spirituality through literature. It was a time when Darwin published The Origin of Species, and Saturn, the facts of what actually happened came up against the myths of the Bible. And you can see, though, how, again, there's this kind of apocalyptic end of the world feeling to a lot of this. There are these seeds of future movements and cultures that appear in the masterpieces that still inspire us. But the things that were going on, it seemed like the country was finished. It seemed like communism was going to sweep over the world. And then Saturn and Aries happened. So that's where we're going to be starting May 30th. So here's some Saturn and Aries things. I like to think of Saturn and Aries because Saturn in Aries is in his fall. It's just not a good place for Saturn. I think of an old man who's asked to party with younger people, and it's not really comfortable for anybody. And what we're used to, what we counted on may not be there anymore. And something else will come up to take its place, but it's rugged and there's a transition and the results have to be corrected constantly. And um, there's also this in Saturn and Aries, this strange kind of double meaning in events. Like for example, Amelia Earhart disappears during Saturn and Aries. Now, on one level, that's sad. On another level, she leaves this undying legend that's a constant source of inspiration to women who want to do things that women were taught for generations they can't do. The Hindenburg explodes. Terrible disaster, but also the cover of a Led Zeppelin album. Um, FDR launched the Federal Arts Project and raised up a whole generation of creative Americans. Disney released their first big feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and Frank Lloyd Wright did this architectural masterpiece called Falling Water that almost everybody has seen. But at the same time, the Japanese attacked China, and this was like kind of the beginning of World War II. Police shot down protesting steel workers in Chicago during the Memorial Day massacre. And I think, by the way, unfortunately, that this is likely to be the kind of thing that happens should martial law be declared and the military deployed to handle protests, as some people are frightened may happen any day now. There is a report that's being delivered. I guess it could justify it if they make that decision. But that's happened before in American history when protesting workers were shot down, when students at Kent State were shot down. And usually when that happens, that is the end of the administration behind it. The Nazis at that time opened an exhibition of propaganda aimed at the Jews, and they happened to also open the Buchenwald concentration camp. They're very efficient that way. And so we can see here that, we're flirting with this concentration camp in El Salvador, and Americans' taxpayer dollars are going to fund a concentration camp. That's a cognitive dissonance that's disturbing to a whole lot of Americans. So this was the time when Saturn was in Aries that was kind of the lead up to World War II and its first several months when the Blitzkrieg seemed invincible. So that can make you kind of nervous. It's like, well, a lot of bad things could happen during Saturn and Aries. But then the next time that Saturn and Aries came around, it was the summer of love. All that great music and art, the sexual revolution, the Black Panthers were devoting themselves to educating their communities. The American Indian movement was born. And New Hollywood astonished the world with films that were unlike any that were ever seen before, liberated kind of cinema. The Vietnam War was going on, but there was huge protests against it. So a very different experience of Saturn in Aries and shows that there can be this kind of higher level of experience if we embrace it. Next time around after that, Saturn and Aries brought the expansion of the dot-com bubble. And a lot of people got rich as that happened. And then suddenly it burst and it devastated the world economy. So Saturn and Aries, you can see through that, I hope, how it's all kind of moving forward, taking action, doing the thing that needs to be done to address the issue in a way that Saturn in Pisces never is. Saturn in Pisces is planning what it's going to do and then maybe executing that plan but it's also kind of just stuck in the past and stuck in tradition and stuck in an overwhelming pessimism that even when it's pretending to be optimistic is filled with dark images and prognostications about what life is like. What are the components of the US shadow, right? We're in this Pluto return, obviously. It's crazy. Like we're seeing all the sides of America Either we thought they were gone, they evolved, beyond that, or we thought that, yes, they're there, but they're a small minority and there's no danger, or, yes, America's an empire, but we do more good than we do bad, and or maybe, we used to be that, but the institutions are good, and maybe we can still find some kind of way to save it and let it be what it could be. And it's reached a point where I think most people just feel like America was always a lie. And now you have people in power who are using the power of the lie and kind of redefining what it means to be an American and what freedom means and hollowing out the actual meanings of the words. And these are all things that Americans have been struggling with since the earliest days of the colonies. And there's this kind of absolutism that America has always struggled with, its own exceptionalism. And that, which by the way, I think there is some truth to it. I mean, for example, the idea that, as you mentioned, that America, at this point, because of what's been done, it could be finished. I mean, it's a great time for China to look like the adult in the room. And it's a great time for Europe to step up. And yet, that's the thing about America. Because of this Gemini characteristic of America, this is what we always do. We elect somebody crazy, not this bunch, but we have done this kind of thing before. We turn on our allies, we make our enemies our friends, and everybody thinks we're crazy. And then magically, 4 years or 8 years later, somebody completely the opposite takes over, and the whole world sighs with relief because America's back to being rational again. We are by far the biggest, most powerful military in the world. China is trying to get there. Russia has no chance to get there. All they have is their nukes. And we are also this powerhouse of finance, our companies, our corporations. We are still an elite power in the world, however dysfunctional our government gets, and very difficult to replace because as crazy as we are, when you look at the dysfunction of the EU and its structure and how difficult and how entangled it is with different cultures that all have to sign off on things, and then you see what happened with the UK, and then you've got the conflict with Russia, and how does this affect the EU? It kind of reduces the sense of confidence. When you look over at China, it's a communist dictatorship, even if it has profound capitalist elements, and it's not transparent. And you can argue that America isn't transparent either, and certainly it is not, but it's more transparent than China. So the investors of the world, the countries of the world, I think it's healthy that right now they're backing away from the old alliances and backing away from America and are exploring alliances with each other, because ultimately what we need in this world is not a dominant power, but everybody cooperating together to face the challenges that are ahead. But to get back to the shadow thing and the tech bros, what do they want? I mean, they've said what they want. They really want sovereign cities or sovereign countries with their own crypto, where the wealthiest of them can face what they consider to be the apocalypse of climate change and scarcity that's going to be coming soon, and they will have every protection. They will have genetic modification of self and children for extra long lifespans, maybe even immortality. They're trying. They will have their private armies, an earthly paradise for them, and a surveillance state and giant prisons for the rest of us. And they have this apocalyptic pessimism about the future that is accelerating the crisis that they fear in
Mhm.
every decision that they make. It's kind of amazing to watch. And then surrounding them, they have this ecosphere of flying monkeys, to use that terminology, who explain and ridicule common sense into extinction. So, for example, you have people who want all women to act a certain way, right? Women should be quiet and mild. Women should never be loud. They should never be happy in front of other men and such things. I mean, this is happening right now. There are people preaching to young males these ideas and telling young females that they better learn right now how to be gentle and how to be quiet if they want to have men in their lives. Anybody who thinks that all women should act in a certain way, they have lost their sense of reality. It's also a failure of imagination. I mean, come on, you know? No, not everybody doesn't act the same way. That's not how nature works. Individuals everywhere. You know, a litter of five kittens will be five individual personalities if you took the time to really find out. Individuality is the essence of life. And so these grandiose intellectual schemes where people decide that all women should be like this and all men who do this are like that, and it reminds me of the Buddhist stories about how the mind is like a monkey that's running after bananas in a tree and finds one banana and then drops it and goes running after another banana. And that's how people live their lives, where their thoughts just running from one thing to another. And they completely lose touch with what's going on in the world. And they consider themselves realists. They tell you, I'm a pragmatist. I'm telling you how it really is. That's the biology of gender, for example, but they're not realists. They're idealists. And they're really
They're
bought. Oh,
narcissists.
that's for sure. Yes. But they're also idealists. They have these ideals, and these ideals may leave much to be desired. But these ideas that they have about how things should be are stronger to them than the reality of the world that they're living in.
I
Uh,
agree 100% with that because of I have working with some of these people over the decades. I can honestly tell you their narcissistic point of view does come from a degree of insecurity.
yeah, of
And
course.
and they are so out of touch on so many levels. And I
Yeah.
was watching something not that long ago where they were talking about how all of this rapture, all of this apocalyptic thinking has happened throughout history. And
Mhm.
it tends to be these people who are just so narcissistic because they're so damaged and so wounded that they can't imagine the world going on without them, because
Right.
that's really it. It's like, well, so if I'm not going to be around, then the world must come to an end. Without looking at history and thinking how many people have predicted the end of the world time and time and time again.
Mhm.
So,
Oh, absolutely. And I think you can call it an apocalyptic elite, right?
yeah, but they're buying bunkers in New Zealand. And I love the biggest one, the one who's like behind so much of this. He lives in, socialist Vienna, and he also has like a big compound in New Zealand while he like destroys our democracy here in the United States. It's like,
Yeah.
where is that disconnect? And it is a lot of these men who just really don't think women have a place in this world. They really can only see their point of view because they don't need women. A lot of them are gay men and just very successful. And for whatever reason, they have this very apocalyptic, very scary view of the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of it has to do, especially now, with what they call desertification. There's a wonderful book by this Canadian writer named Brian Griffith called The Garden of Our Dreams that traces this out in human history. And the pattern goes like this. Humans create cultures that grow and flourish. And the more they flourish, the more independence is given to women, to foreigners, to non-royals, to non-warriors. Suddenly everybody has rights and there's laws and there's art for everybody and women can own property and divorce becomes possible and you can even be a homosexual and be part of culture and create culture. Then there's a change of climate or the population grows too large and it uses up its available resources. The scarcity rears its ugly head, and then the ruling and warrior classes impose patriarchy again. They take away everyone's rights because it's an emergency, you see. The very survival of the people, of their way of life is on the line. And people that were welcomed guests from other countries are ejected. Once tolerated opposition is killed or exiled. And usually it ends in invading a better topography or being invaded by someone fleeing even harsher circumstances. So I think that's I think that some of these people, this paranoid elite, are reacting from this idea that this desertification is occurring, and so there are these shocks and these scarcity moments that are going to be coming, and they see it. And instead of spending their billions and their supposed brilliance and trying to do things to help, they're helping make it happen and just trying to protect themselves in the most incredibly selfish way and short-sighted way, as if they could be safe under such circumstances. But this does go back to the very beginning of the country. It really is a Pluto return thing because, for example, you've got John Winthrop the Elder, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. There's a story about him cowering in a native minstrel hut, loudly singing Christian hymns in terror of a thunderstorm in the forest. And the funny thing is that his son, the younger, was an alchemist, an astrologer, and possibly a Rosicrucian, and one of the founders of Connecticut. So go figure that. But there it is, that split in America. The father was terrified of the wilderness. He was an authoritarian. He thought that Satan was everywhere and had to be fought. And the son was interested in diversity and equality, was interested in the esoteric, and was really a blessing to everybody in the territory that he helped to found. So that split of the American personality is there right away in the very beginning. And so where else do we find in this American shadow? One is definitely the tech bros. We've also got the contradictions of American Christianity. Told to render unto Caesar, they want an empire. Told to run the other cheek, to turn the other cheek, they idolize crusaders. They're told that a rich man has no chance to get into heaven. And so they sell prayers for $1,000 that'll make poor people rich. How did the teacher who said, "Judge not, lest ye be judged," end up being the patron saint of sadistic trolls on social media? It's weird. And George Bernard Shaw did not actually say Christianity might be a good thing if anyone ever tried it. But I've met really great Christians, actually, soulful, lovely people, and they're as horrified as anyone by the cruelty of current events perpetrated by people that they think there's no way that they can actually be Christian because they demonize compassion. They value guns as much as they value Jesus. They lord it over other people. They like to kind of twist the knife in. None of that's Christian, and a real Christian knows that. It's what happens when people let their brains kind of run amok, the monkey chasing after the bananas, and then words get twisted into the opposite of what they mean. And it's hubris, ultimately. And the consequences of hubris are unavoidable. I mean, the Greeks knew that 2,500 years ago when they wrote plays about what happens when you commit hubris. So, what else do we find in America's shadow? Um, Bigots, homophobes, racists, misogynists, because they've always been there. I can tell you, as somebody who toured with a Riot Girl band in the United States, that there were a lot of people who, in the supposedly, progressive indie world, who were pissed off about just the fact that a woman would get up on a stage and play guitar and sing about what dicks men can be. Um, so it's like it's a joke. A bigot, a homophobe, a racist, and a misogynist walk into a bar, and it's one guy or girl. But these are people who kind of long for the return of the good old days. And the good old days are when other religions cowered in the shadows, and gay people weren't allowed to exist in public, and people of color lived in fear for their lives, and women weren't allowed to speak when men were in the room. So after all, it wasn't until 1974 that women were even allowed to have their own checking accounts. And it does seem these days that certain people think women shouldn't vote so much. And we'll see what happens with that because they're rolling back the rights of women whose names were changed through marriage to vote. And not everybody has the time and money to go get a passport. But those are the shadows as I see them that are really kind of, they joined together and they have created this new vision of America that we're all trying to deal with. But this has been here all along. I mean, this was This was the Tea Party. This was, the George Wallace movement. This was the Reagan and the Falwell in their unholy alliance. I mean, there's been this effort to force others to conform to a certain vision of Christianity and of power and the power of these paranoid elites all along. I mean, one could argue that human history is filled with it, right? Because if you want to take power and you want to be the leader who cannot be questioned, you need to manufacture crisis so that people want that strong leader. And that's the story of American politics, really. But we are really seeing it now. And in a weird way, this is probably going to sound crazy to everybody, but I think it's healthy. It's like when an addict hits rock bottom, you know? People have been telling your uncle he needs to stop drinking for years. And then one day he drinks himself into running around naked, outside screaming about how the zombies are after him. And there's no more saying he doesn't have a problem. And we have to, as a country now, we are all absorbing this shadow and we're living in fear of it. And we're all finding out what it was like to be in a smaller country when America turned its attention on you because it wanted something from you or it didn't want you there at all. And this is the karma, if you will, if you want to use that word, of what America has sown being reaped. And now it's on us to see, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond to this? How are we going to not just survive, but flourish? Usually in politics, when extremes happen, they evoke extremes.
This is just a quick pause to tell you about my upcoming beginner astrology class called Astrology Foundations 1, Charting Your Own Destiny. In this class, we look at how you can read your own chart. If you've ever wanted to learn from me, now is your opportunity. This is an astrology class for non-astrologers. So if you love watching YouTube videos of your favorite astrologer, but you never know what they're talking about specifically when it comes to your own chart, this class can help you, especially those videos that say for all 12 signs. You will know what you're listening for. And that's the most important thing because you're not always going to be right on the money if you listen for your sun, moon, or rising sign. It is a very basic break it down class where we have several introductory videos that you can watch for a lifetime. And then there will be 2 live sessions with me where I'm going to be doing as many readings as I can as examples to help you integrate your learning. And then my teacher, Steven Forrest, who is a legend in the astrology community, will also be teaching one of the live modules. So if this is interesting to you, there will be a link in the description box and also pinned in the comments. And as always, if you are enjoying the content on my channel, I encourage you to like, subscribe, share. And I also want to thank you for being a supporter because the more that you engage with my content, the more other people see it and the more I am encouraged to make more content. So I want to thank everybody who's been on this journey with me over the past year, and I hope to see you in my class.
So, what I'd like to tell people is about the sign changes. This is what's coming up next, and so what is asked of us now when you look at the sign changes. So let's go over that briefly. So in about 6 weeks, we're leaving Saturn in Pisces, and again, this is a time of rumination, climax, the spectacle of consequences, the results of just under 30 years of efforts, successful and failed. And hopefully, it's made most of us more soulful, more charitable, more open to inspiration, more compassionate. But for some people, it invokes an obsession with religion and with fantasies of dystopia and apocalypse. Well, starting May 30, we get Saturn enters Aries. So, what are we asked to do? What does this new weather expect from us? So, we're asked to take a more youthful perspective, no matter how old we are, to start over, let go of the past, work on being healthier, helping our bodies have energy by doing right things, better nutrition, get some exercise. Don't just feed on doom all the time. We can refuse to engage in hostility as a way of life. We can, refuse to have to be outraged every single day by the latest piece of news, or hanging there in space staring at what people are saying, going, oh my God, how can people be this stupid? Or whatever our reactions are to all this madness that's going on around us. We can learn Aries activities. We can master them, like cooking or martial arts or sports. We can have an adventure, mentor young people, find ways to facilitate the talents of a new generation. I mean, they've been so blocked off from everything. I mean, when I'm sure, when we were kids, we had all ages clubs and, places for bands could play. And there was just all this stuff going on where kids could go out and have experiences and reinvent themselves. And, most of that's just all gone. And kids have to just put their stuff on YouTube and then it languishes because no one really pays attention. And, we can do something about that. We can find people that we can support however we can, share their work and encourage them. We can put a brake on hostility in our immediate environment. When we see arguments, when conflict is breaking out, we can get right to the point and try to change what needs to be changed. Aries is very direct about that. I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to be polite. I'm going to say, this is wrong. What are we going to do to fix it? Um, we can let go of the burdens of the past and the worries about the future and live in the present. Aries is very much right here in the moment. It's like a constant springtime. So that's what Saturn's asking of us in this change to Aries that starts at the end of May. We've had Uranus in Taurus for a while now, indicating that people feel stubborn and belligerent. The disruptions and stress that's going on, the rapid change makes people hunker down, makes them irritable. They believe that might is right, and they're very focused on what they want. I want is a great mantra of Taurus. But in summer, we have Uranus entering Gemini. This is really creative. This is, if you're doing music, film, podcasts, inventions, writing, software, now you've got your thing. Find new approaches, be inventive, be open to contradiction and opposite points of view. Understand the importance of not shutting down different opinions. And instead of being consumed by social media, using it intelligently. Gemini, I think it could be, Uranus and Gemini could be the way that AI kind of starts to interface with everyday life for people, where you begin to improve your podcast because you're using AI for research or for advice, or there's this kind of partnership mentality that builds up and the desire to see both sides of issues instead of preaching to the choir, or existing in kind of echo chamber where everybody has to have the same belief system. Gemini wants to gather information and facts from everybody and kind of sift through it and decide what has the weight of truth to it. So that's what the Uranus part of it is. We've had Neptune in Pisces for even longer now. And again, a sense of culmination, of endings. And again, hopefully we've enriched our souls and become more compassionate. We've been focused on, how things used to be with Neptune and Pisces. Now we start this new cycle. It's an adventure. We should be open to inspiration, and we should be encouraging new art, new music, new leaders. If you see anything that turns you on, share it with people, and it's like sharing find the aristocracy of the spirit. Like find anything that makes you feel elevated, and then go out there and share it with people. Wherever you see the fog of war, bring Neptune, beautiful art, magical music, inspiring wisdom. Uh, laugh at the old serious, pompous past, clinging to how things used to be. This is, all this started in 2011 when Neptune just took the wind out of the sails of Neptune in Aquarius. And it was like everything just sort of turned into this frozen, echo of the 20th century in some ways. Neptune is considered the higher octave of Venus. So we can make art, music, romance, bring beauty to life instead of lamenting or apprehending the future. And even in dire circumstances, we can take time to appreciate who and what we love and cherish because that nourishes the soul. And finally, what does Pluto want from us? Well, Pluto was in Capricorn beginning in 2008. It just ended last year. In 2008, and from there until last year, it asked us to tighten our belts, face consequences, do what we're told. The frustrations of modern living led to attempts to force the world to comply with traditional mindsets or with pessimistic kinds of policies that took away hope and took away the ability to prosper and to feel security. And there has been like this circular firing squad of Capricorn perfectionism. It's all too common during times like this because stress puts our minds into overdrives. We overthink and we overcriticize. So we may like every single thing about somebody, but this one thing they did, this politician, and because of that, I'll never ever support them. And then you wind up getting something much worse. So this perfectionism is typical Pluto in Capricorn. But now we're in Pluto in Aquarius. And this is an amazing placement, because Aquarius is about liberation. It's about unleashing the power of diversity. And there is power in diversity, learning from other cultures to understand the strength of striving for equality and the necessity of nurturing humanitarian instincts and holding independence to be our birthright, not just as Americans, but as human beings. This is Aquarian stuff. And Pluto and Aquarius wants us to work together for a world where we use technology and are not used by it or by those who profit from it. Pluto and Aquarius is not about elites. It's the opposite of elites, and it's the opposite of paranoia. It's optimism about the future based on cooperation and inventive genius. Aquarius wants you to be unique, even idiosyncratic. Pluto and Aquarius wants you to network, to innovate, to have a passion for progress and for justice. And it asks us to be free spirits, to be creative, intellectual, tolerant, with an open mind and a passion for the arc of freedom in the history of humanity. So I wanted to share this for everybody because it blew my mind when I ran into it accidentally. And speaking of Aquarius, it's very appropriate, I think. This is John F. Kennedy, who had Uranus in Aquarius. And of course, he was an imperfect human being, like all presidents, although some more than others. And here's something that JFK said about times like these, an excerpt from a speech he gave in Los Angeles in 1961. So these are just some pieces from it. This is Kennedy. In recent months, I have spoken many times about how difficult and dangerous a period it is through which we now move. I would like to take this opportunity to say a word about the American spirit in this time of trial. In the most critical periods of our nation's history, there have always been those fringes of our society who have sought to escape their own responsibility by finding a simple solution, an appealing slogan, or a convenient scapegoat. Financial crises could be explained by the presence of too many immigrants or too few greenbacks. War could be attributed to munitions makers or international bankers. Peace conferences failed because we were duped by the British or tricked by the French or deceived by the Russians. It was not the presence of Soviet troops in Eastern Europe that drove it to communism. It was the sellout at Yalta. It was not a civil war that removed China from the free world. It was treason in high places. At times, these fanatics have achieved a temporary success among those who lack the will or the wisdom to face unpleasant facts or unsolved problems. But in time, the basic good sense and stability of the great American consensus has always prevailed. Now we are face to face once again with a period of heightened peril. The risks are great, the burdens heavy, the problems incapable of swift or lasting solution. And under the strains and frustrations imposed by constant tension and harassment, the discordant voices of extremism are once again heard in the land. Men who are unwilling to face up to the danger from without are convinced that the real danger is from within. They object quite rightly to politics intruding on the military, but they are very anxious for the military to engage in their kind of politics. Let our patriotism be reflected in the creation of confidence in one another, rather than in crusades of suspicion. Let us prove we think our country great by striving to make it greater. And above all, let us remember, however serious the outlook, however harsh the task, the one great irreversible trend in the history of the world is on the side of liberty. And we, for all time to come, are on the same side.
Very powerful.
So, fine words. But what are the practical steps to take during times like these? So, a little bit of advice for everybody. Like I said, make time for appreciation of who and what you cherish every single day. It's really good for you. It's good for your body. It's good for your heart. It's good for your soul. It's good for your mind. Find joy with those you love every chance you can get. There's a whole movement of people out there who cringe when people show joy because it just means you're stupid if you can feel joy at times like this. But joy is available to us anywhere, anywhere, in almost any conditions, not all. But if we have a life where joy is available to us in these simple, humble ways, we should be making a point out of being involved in that every single day. I believe that love is the most powerful magic. And this is something that Marsilio Ficino, who was a father of the Renaissance, said. And it wasn't just a poetic sentiment, it was the key to magic. Love is the most powerful force. Where do you put your love? Do you love doom scrolling? Have you fallen in love with outrage? Take a moment or two to feel love about your life, about people, about pets, about beauty, about anything that moves you. Remind yourself that that's there in life too. It's waiting to be recognized by you every single day. Stop worrying about the future and be where you are. And I do suggest prayer and meditation or art or whatever means you prefer to ask the universe to show you how you can take all that you're feeling about all this and all this desire you feel to do something about it, to do something constructive for yourself and others. Ask for guidance, and you'll be surprised at the way synchronicities can flurry around your sincerity and the way may be opened that is unique for you. And I think especially if you have children, anybody who has children or grandchildren, keep in mind what the doom and gloom of family means to them. If the adults around them are feeling like we're doomed, it's terrible for the kids. Encourage them, nourish them with great art and great ideas. Teach them patience and dedication, equanimity, the importance of tranquility, and the power of honesty and honor in a world that's overrun by lies. And you give them strength. You show them that there's an alternative to what they're seeing on the feed every day. And let's look to our own corners of the universe. What's worth fighting for in your life? Who's worth fighting for? Where can you help something worthwhile flourish? What has life put in front of you to save or to help? So, for example, as I mentioned, we see women being told that they must be quiet and gentle because they actually have the nerve to say Deus vult, as the Crusaders used to. God wills it. So get used to it, ladies. And this is the 21st damn century, okay? So what can we do about it? Support some loud women. Make a point of it. Encourage the women you love to speak their mind. Find a way to make a difference. Do the research. Have faith in yourself and others who love freedom. This love of life is a powerful force, and it can give hope to people who feel that life isn't worth living anymore. Refuse to comply with dystopia. Go ahead and make the self-appointed arbiters of social media cringe and be joyful. Be unique. Be true to yourself, not to false standards imposed from outside you by anybody. And don't let the runaway intellects of others ruling our world stampede your own. Get grounded. Find more things that help you get grounded. We're not starting from scratch. The civil rights movement, women's liberation, gay liberation, and the Constitution's guarantee of freedom of religion all have long histories and inspire deep loyalty. Last time Neptune entered Aries, slavery was still legal in America. The property and earnings of women belonged to their husbands because they had no legal identity to be recognized by courts and banks. Homosexuality was a crime all over America. Only Walt Whitman dared celebrate what he called manly love in a masterpiece of American poetry. And America was very Christian last time around. The Catholic Church was growing. Church attendance was way up among Protestants. There were something like 4 million spiritualists around, many of them Christian, and they represented about 10% of the population then. Today, according to Springtide Research Institute, 51% of people aged 13 to 25 engage in tarot cards or fortune telling. And 37% of Americans under age 30 believe in astrology. This is not pre-Elvis America in the 1950s. This is America in the 2020s. And there is a whole lot of people who don't fit into this image, this conformity that is being shoved down everybody's throats. And there is no way that the vast majority of people will eventually kowtow to this. This is not a country where people are used to being treated like serfs with no rights. This is a country of cantankerous people, most of whom came here as the refugees or immigrants from places where they wanted to get away from this kind of stuff, where they wanted freedom to do what they wanted to do. And this is infused into what America is. I don't know how the change will come about. I know that we have this incredible piece of astrology coming up where all the outer planets will be sextiling and trining each other. Um, we don't know what it's going to bring, but it should be something quite dramatic when you've got Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, I believe even Jupiter for a time, all in these beautiful harmonious patterns like a big mandala. Something, there's the potential for something glorious to happen. Part of it is probably the effect of AI. There could be a cultural renaissance of some kind, probably driven by youth. There could be some kind of a shocking turnaround in the politics of the nation because some brilliant, 14-year-old hacker spills a bunch of data that proves who the criminals are. We don't know how it's going to happen, but these changes are coming up, and they're coming up soon. And I think, one way I like to look at this, I think it's helpful for people, is so this is what we're leaving right now. So for anybody out there, if you're queer or you're a person of color, or, if you're a woman, you feel like maybe you're pagan and you feel like you're really in danger now in this America, and you're afraid that this is going to be how America is, and that all the things that you've posted on social media for 10 years are going to doom you to a prison in El Salvador because of what you said. Um, we're coming out of a time when the four outside planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, were in respectively Pisces, Taurus, Pisces, and Capricorn. Now, do you see how conservative that is? How Christian that is? How non-gay, non-diverse those signs are? These are all earth and water signs. And they're signs that tend to be, especially Pisces and Capricorn, they tend to be looking backwards, looking for old traditions, how things used to be, and idealizing that. Taurus is stubborn and not very concerned about other people, but just my own security is what matters. Well, where we're going, and we're going to experience this summer, is those four outer planets are going to be Aries, Gemini, Aries, and Aquarius.
Keep talking.
That is so different. That is air and fire versus water and earth. That is forward looking, not backward looking. That is gay friendly, female friendly, friendly to all diversity, to all points of view. And I'm not talking DEI, I'm talking valuing everyone.
Humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Valuing differences, the excitement of learning that happens when we experience that instead of staying within this one lane that may be racial or religious or whatever. We get to rise above and see all the lanes and all the ways that they go. And we have enough imagination to be curious about how other people see these things. And we learn from it and it deepens our own experience of life. So right now, as we talk, we're sort of half and half. We've got Saturn still in Pisces. We've got Uranus still in Taurus. But Neptune's in Aries and Pluto's in Aquarius. So again, starting at the end of May and then again in summer, we're going to have these two more things happen where Saturn leaves Pisces for Aries and Gemini leaves Taurus for, I'm sorry, Uranus leaves Taurus for Gemini. We're going to get a taste of what the future is going to look like this summer. And then next year, it's on. So I don't know exactly what that means. I really don't, because I have to say that, like most people, looking at what's happening right now, it's very bleak. And it seems like it could go much more in bad ways than good ways. But when I look at the astrology, I have to feel a sense of optimism. And I have to say that you can see that this is as violent a change as what happened, maybe more so when Pluto was in Sagittarius, for years, and it was the dot-com bubble, and it was, yay, we're all making money and we're going to make money forever. It's just going to go up, up, up. And nobody really bothered with anything. If it's a good story, then it's going to go up. And all of a sudden, Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008, down crashed the world markets, and everything was based on facts. What are these derivatives? We don't even know. They're nonsense. They're worth nothing then. Well, now we're shifting the other way. We're leaving all this pessimism, the pessimism of Pisces and Capricorn, the stubbornness of Taurus, and we're entering the eagerness of Aries, the curiosity of Gemini, and Aquarius love of individuality and diversity and fairness. It's a very different setup from what we're experiencing right now. And somehow, at least in the next few years, we're going to be looking back on now as being a completely different time than where we will find ourselves. So I can only imagine that in the great creativity of the American collective, there are people we may not even have heard of, maybe somebody listening right now, who are going to do amazing things, new leaders, new ideas, new approaches, and that each of us in our own lives can bring that energy to others. We can be a stable influence in the midst of all this chaos. We can hold to what we know is true, ethics, honesty, compassion. We can be the presence of, as Lincoln put it, the better angels of America. And we can hold to that ideal and hopefully be able to get through and survive this American Pluto return and the Uranus return with a new revitalized America. You know, America did give up slavery, although it keeps trying to find ways to keep it happening. We still have a lot of work to do, but we, all the generations living now of American citizens, are in a position that's really a great position of honor to fight for America and for this. I mean, people died for this, you know, the American Revolution and World War II and the Civil War, dying for freedom and independence. And hopefully we won't have to die to protect it, but we will have to bring our best. And each of us is gifted in our own unique ways. So let's find out what our unique gifts are and let's bring them to the world during this process.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ronnie.
You're welcome, Downey. Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
While I've been sitting here, I don't know if you can see my cute kitty cat.
Aw.
So, it's a good reminder. I have this cat that is like a toddler. I know Ronnie's a fan of cats too.
I am.
And so while I'm hearing all of that, I don't want to add too much because I think you really gave us so much of a gift.
Well,
And
thank you.
I did pick a card while you were talking, and I got Owl Spirit. You see clearly now. So I thought that
Nice.
was a really nice validation of everything you were saying. And I think it gives people this. I'm going to be putting this video out this weekend when
Okay.
Mars is beginning to oppose Pluto. We're going to be going into that energy. And so I think having this kind of grounding sense that there's a bigger picture, that we don't know the end, that life is filled with cycles, but all of the different planetary energies, history doesn't repeat exactly because there's all sorts of different things going on.
It's
We
kind of a
didn't,
spiral usually, you know, a spiral up, I hope.
yeah.
We're
And
slowly climbing.
there's so much potential too, which we didn't even talk about. And so maybe I'll have you on this summer or, in a few months to talk about Jupiter going into Cancer and we're a
Oh,
Cancer
yeah.
nation,
Exalted.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be hitting all our personal planets in this
Hmm.
country. So
Hmm.
there is something about, a revitalization of nationalism, a revitalization of, forgiveness and
Yeah.
coming back together
Yeah.
and compassion rising.
Inclusive patriotism.
Yeah. Right.
E-
Not the faux patriotism that's filled with just bullying people.
Exactly.
So, the can't Jupiter in Cancer is the Statue of Liberty message,
Hmm.
So I think that
It's also a reminder of the power of imagination and of inspiration, is because Jupiter gives you the ability to transform the world into prosperity and justice and to bring uh, joy to the world. And Cancer gives you this power of the imagination. So we all, I mean, I am somebody who believes through experience in the soul. And as such, I believe that we are all connected to what is really an infinite source of creativity. And so if we can calm down enough to have that spiritual contact, if we can have that faith that there's something that we bring to the world that is uniquely ours, really amazing things can happen.
yeah. Yeah. And how, it's not all bad.
Mm-mm.
And, there are really scary, horrible things happening right now.
Mhm.
And I would say there have been really scary, horrible things happening throughout other times in our lives and throughout history. And we are living in a world where we are getting constantly bombarded by all of those messages. And so that is a little bit of that clouding. And so hopefully there will be some clarity on all of the things that you said. And I'm really appreciative that you're giving us something to hold on to during this time. I think
Thank you, Dabney.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. Well, Everyone, there is a reason and a season for it all, and the universe is conspiring to help us. And I think Ronnie just gave us a very nice roadmap to how that can happen. So let's just all have a little bit of faith. No one's going to come rescue us. We've got a lot of new Aries, Aquarius, Gemini. None of that's about being rescued. But it is absolutely about having faith, though, and liberation, diversity, uniqueness, free spirit. That's all those things, like you said. So until next time, stargazers.